Okay, Jim again. Today we're going to make Milanese lamb shanks. Sounds interesting. We're going to make it with 100% plant-based food, of course. We're going to be using the seitan that I showed you how to make in episode 7. So watch this. There's a little bit involved in it, but it's really pretty simple if you take your time. We'll get cracking. Okay, that's a seitan that I made a couple of days ago. I've left that in the fridge for 2 days to really let the gluten develop. You see it's really gone fibrous. Now these shanks, I'm just going to make 2, and I want about 150 grams per shank of the seitan. So we'll just get the scales to get this reasonably accurate. Plonk that on there. That's about 400, it's a bit too much. 350, so they're going to be 175 each. So what we're trying to get is a bit of a lamb influence here in the seitan. Now to do that, I'm just going to make a pocket in the seitan before we chuck it into the stand mixer. Lamb is always great with a bit of mint sauce. So spread that out a little bit more. It'll give it that lamby taste that people are... In fact, I'll chuck the whole thing in there. I'm going to go in with about a tablespoon of just any old bottled mint sauce. That's a fountain brand that we use in Australia. It's quite nice. And to that, we're going to chuck in about 2 teaspoons of rosemary. Always a great flavour in lamb. In fact, about 1.5. We don't want to overpower it. Now I'm going to put this in with the dough hook to get everything to blend in and develop a little bit more fibre, texture, and blend the flavours all together. We'll leave that go for a couple of minutes. We'll come back. It's been going for about 2 minutes. You can see it really dancing around in there, doing a bit of a pirouette. The hook fitting in the stand mixer is really doing its thing. We'll give that about another 2 minutes till it really forms up into a ball, and we'll be ready to roll them out into lamb shanks. Okay, that's had about 5 minutes. You can see how the ball's really developed. I'm going to turn that off now. Lift her up. You could, of course, have kneaded this by hand, but I'm a lazy bugger. I mean, you've got a machine that'll do it for you. Simple, because that machine's going to take me about, with a bit of hot water, about 30 seconds to clean. Get the stand mixer out of the way, and I'll just weigh this again so I can get it roughly right. About 360 grams, so I'll try to get this into 2 even pieces. 190, we'll take a bit off that, bring that back to about 180. 176, near enough. Right, now we're trying to form a shank. Now a lamb shank, as you'd be familiar with in the days that you would have eaten the meat, it's got a lot of fibre in it. The sort of muscle tissues, when they slowly cook, break apart. So we could roll this out with a rolling pin if we wanted to, but that'd be too uniform. What we want to get is some uneven blobs and lumps, and some skinny bits, some lumpy bits, so that when it actually forms, it's got that natural sort of look to it, the texture that we're looking for. So poke it about with your fingers, get a thick bit there, bigger bit there. A few holes don't matter. And then we want a bone. We don't want this to roll back together and form another big lump. We're only going to loosely roll this. So we're going to hit it with a bit of cooking spray, so as it rolls up around itself, give it a bit on the other side, it's sort of, again, let's give it a poke and a rough up. This is the way you want it to look. That way those lumps, when they cook, shouldn't totally stick together. So here's our bone of the shank, if you like. We're just going to really roughly roll that around there. Give it a bit of a poke and a prod. Here and there, fold it up a bit. No real science to this. You want it to be sort of looking like a bit of a lamb shank. A real rough, rustic look like that's about what we're looking for. Now, give that a bit of a poke and a prod. That's about ready to go to be cooked. Just sort of seal it up here and there. We're hoping to have a few little openings here and there to allow a bit of the simmering liquid to get into, to really get that flavour into it. And the smell, it smells gorgeous. Smell that lamb, bit of rosemary, delicious. I'll do the other one, then I'll get onto the Milanese sauce. One final thing I'm doing now that I've formed the two shanks, just where there's a few seams, I'm going to pop in a few toothpicks just to ensure that doesn't come apart while cooking. Don't be shy with these. Far better to use a few of these and let your shank fall apart as it simmers away. So just randomly poke those in wherever you see a bit of a seam happening. They'll of course, when you go to serve them, pop out very easily. Another bit of a seam there. And you can see a bit of a seam there. And that should ensure your shank holds together. Okay, I've got the veggies ready for the Milanese stock cum sauce. Just in with a good, in the burner. About, a tablespoon maybe of oil, maybe a bit more. Now, I'm just using the frozen chopped onions because I'm lazy and they're simple. If you want a good issue, about the equivalent of a large chopped onion. Then in with the carrots, that's about one medium carrot finely chopped. Then the celery, that's one large stick of celery finely chopped. Get the board and scoop the rest of this in. Okay, give that a bit of a stir around. To that, garlic. Again, the pre-minced stuff out of a jar is just fine. Don't make this any harder than it has to be. And you want about 2 tablespoons. It is an Italian dish after all. Garlic is one of the critical ingredients. I'm just going to crank the burner up a little bit. Start it out hot. And we want to fry that off for 2-3 minutes just to get it all softened up, get a little bit of colour to it. So we'll come back once that is done. Okay, it's at about 4 or 5 minutes. Garlic's flavour's really developed. You'd smell it, you'd love it. Okay, at this point, we go in with some flour. That's about a tablespoon, that's about another tablespoon. We're just going to fry that afresh for about a minute until the flour cooks off. That's to thicken the sauce up a little bit. You don't want it super thick. It's more of a simmering sauce, and that's going to be plenty. Now we'll go in with a cup of white wine, a dry white wine. Just cheap stuff out of a cask, or your $5 bottle's fine. Anyone who tells you want to put $20 or $30 bottles of cooked wine into cooking is talking out of their arse. It's just a waste of money. Okay, bring that back to the boil. Now, while that's doing so, we'll go in with a few other ingredients. The flour off that spoon. Now, when this is normally done with a lamb shank, part of the flavour of the lamb will come out into the sauce and flavour it. Now obviously our Seitan's not going to do that, so we have to give it some help. Now for this purpose I'm going to go in with some vegan beef stock powder. You do want a fair bit to give it the flavour. I'm saying about 2 tablespoons. You see how that sauce is starting to thicken? That's thicker than we want it at this point. You don't want to go with entirely wine to be overpowering. We're going to come in with about a cup of water. We'll see what the consistency is like. Also critical to this dish, bay leaves. Fantastic things. They add a real flavour. Don't be shy with these. Now I'm going to go in with, they break up and fall apart. 3 or 4 whole bay leaves roughly. We'll fish them out obviously at the end. Stir that up. Consistency's looking good. Tiny bit of oregano. As I've said before, oregano adds a great flavour, but it can take over a dish. I'm going in with a pinch, about that much. Any more than that, all you'll taste bloody oregano. You just want it to add a little bit without taking over. We're now going to plonk a lid on that, turn it down to low. We're going to let that cook for a good 20-30 minutes, maybe more, until the veggies start to break down a bit, to let all the flavours release before we pop our lamb shanks in. It's been going for about 15 minutes so far. You can see how the colour's changing. As the colour's particularly coming out of the carrots. You need to come in every 10 minutes and go and just give it a bit of a stir to make sure it doesn't catch on the bottom. There is flour in there. If you boil it too vigorously, you will burn the flour, although there's a lot of fluid in there. So we'll just keep that going for about another 15 minutes, giving it a stir every 5 minutes or so, and we'll be ready to pop the shanks in. Okay, that's had about half an hour. That's plenty. It's going to continue to cook once we pop the shanks in. As I always say, you need to taste as you go. Taste, adjust, get it right. Now, not quite beefy or meaty enough for my taste, so I'm going to go in with about that much more of the vegan beef stock. Bit of MSG, as I always say, you can leave it out if you like. You're probably going to add a little bit of salt if you leave the MSG out, but MSG is harmless. It occurs naturally in lots of foods like tomatoes, mushrooms, Vegemite, Marmite, there's a whole host of things. All the myths have been debunked about it. Now that's still got quite an acidy tang from the wine. We go with some sugar. Sugar will bring out the fruitiness of the veg and take that acid edge of the wine away. So we'll stir that in, give it another taste. We can always adjust it right at the end. Out of the way, give it another quick taste. Much better. Just because it's a lamb dish, for a bit of fun, I'm going to add a bit of mint sauce to it. Just a good shake. Not a big fan of mint sauce. Don't put the mint sauce in. But to me, mint and lamb is a match made in heaven. That really adds something. Now, we're going to plonk the shanks in, nice and gently. Okay, it's going to need some more water. It's not quite covering them up. I'll just pause for a second and go and grab some boiling water. Okay, I've grabbed some boiling water. I'm just going to tip that over until we just cover the shanks up. And I know what you're saying, that's going to dilute the sauce. Don't worry about that. What we do when we finish and we take the shanks out, we can reduce the sauce back. And we're going to do that anyway to get it nice and thick and super tasty. Now we're going to turn the burner up for a second to bring that to the boil, because the shanks, of course, whilst they're at room temperature, have cooled the fluid down a bit. And we don't want to boil the life out of this. Give it all a bit of a stir to mix that water in with the existing sauce. Give it all a bit of a stir around so it all incorporates. I want it covering up the shanks completely so that it really gently cooks them away, lets the flavour get into the shanks. Now that that's come to the boil, I'm going to pop the lid on there. I'm going to turn the burner down. On this induction cooker, it's got an 80 Celsius setting, a 200 watt setting. That's going to keep that at a sort of somewhere between a poach and a simmer. We don't want that vigorously simmering or boiling. It'll just toughen everything up. We're going to leave that sit in there for about an hour and she should be ready. But I'll give it a poke and a test then, see how it feels. Might need a little longer. We'll come back in about an hour. Okay, this will give you an idea of how it's cooking. These little induction cookers, on the low setting, the 80 Celsius setting, they come in, they give it a burst of heat to get it gently bubbling, then they switch off, and then it'll come on and bubble again, beginning to bubble again for a second, keeping it a very, very low simmer, almost a poach. It should be ready in about another 40 minutes. Okay, we'll just come back and have another look. It's got probably about another 20-25 minutes to go. You can see how the sauce is changing as it cooks. Just gently bubbling away there. We'll come back when it's finished. Okay, the shanks have had about an hour. And we're just going to gently lift them out and plop them onto a plate. They are super tender. Just gently out onto the plate. They're swollen up. You can see how the meat-like fibres have formed. This has come up an absolute treat. Okay. See, they've swollen up from their original size. where I left it sort of open, it's allowed all the sauce to get in, get the flavour right through the shank, let it swell up, go tender. Now what we'll do, pop some foil over those to keep them warm. Now we're going to crank the burner up. We're going to reduce this sauce. We'll take out the bay leaves. I won't bore you with the boiling away for the next 5 or 10 minutes. As soon as that's reduced back to a great sauce consistency, we'll give the sauce a taste, see if it needs anything to finish it off, and we'll see what it looks like as a finished Milanese lamb shank. Okay, you can see I've got that going at a fairly vigorous old boil, because it's going to take probably 10 minutes or so to reduce back to a, we don't want it to be a super thick sauce. We want it a bit, at the moment, a bit too runny. So probably 10 minutes or so of vigorous boiling. Still giving it a good stir to make sure nothing catches on the bottom. And that should be ready in about 10 minutes. Okay, you see that's reduced back a fair bit. Not quite as thick as I'd like it. Possibly could have put a little bit more flour at the start. Just a touch runny for a sauce, you see that? Just a bit runny. That's easily fixed. As I say, cooking's all about adjusting and fixing as you need it. So a bit of a slurry. Just a bit of plain flour in a glass jar with a bit of water, give it a shake, get rid of all the lumps. And turn the burner off for a second as we add this, so that it doesn't lump. This is probably only going to need a tiny bit. In with a dash, stir it around. Bit thicker, tiny bit more. Didn't need any near as much as I made up. Now I'm going to turn the burner back on. Get some heat into that to cook that bit of flour through. That tiny bit of flour like that's not going to give it a nasty raw flour taste. That sausage is brimming with flavour to begin with. I'll just check the consistency again. Just running off the spoon. That's about how I like it. At this point, we give it the final test and see if it needs any adjusting to the flavour. Turn that right down. Good stir around. Very good. What I'm going to do is go in. Could do just a touch more sweetness. It is lamb. Lamb's supposed to be a sweet tasting meat. Good old molasses. This will add a little bit of sweetness and a bit of irony flavour. Goes great with any meat-based, plant-based dish. And with that, also gives the sauce a bit more colour. It's just going to finish it off nicely. See how it's browning it up a bit? Mix that all in. One final taste, but I'm sure that's about right now. Oh, it's added that bit of iron, sweetened it up a bit, and added an iron flavour to it. And as this is we're trying to create a meaty dish, that iron flavour really adds to it. So let's now have a look at the shanks. I've taken the toothpicks out of those. Just have a look at those. They look sensational. Now spoon a bit of sauce over those. You can serve this with, I'm going to have it later today, or later tonight, but you can have this with some mashed potatoes, some steamed veggies, and pour that delicious sauce all over the veggies, the mashed potato. Let's just take a knife and fork and see how it falls apart. Because I think that is almost fork tender. I think a knife, look at that. It's always got beautiful, like a sinew and a meaty texture to it. We'll dip it in the sauce and give it a taste test. Oh, I can taste the rosemary, the mint. It's tender, it's juicy, it's just falling apart like a lamb shank would, with all those sort of natural meatiness that a shank would have. That, my friends, is a winner. It's a showstopper. Serve that to your friends and you'll convince them that plant-based food really is the business. See you next time.